And that puts a lot on the plate of players like Spencer Dinwiddie, who just came in, who fights Marshall for the corner three.
When you see the Mavs just play differently without Luka on the floor, he's a guy who's high usage rate, the ball's in his hands. When he's not on the floor, that ball is moving, it's popping, multiple players getting involved in action, and everyone's stepping up.
Lower usage rate for him this year.
Listen closely to the message behind the words. You can hear the contempt in how Stephanie White talks about Luka Doncic, labeling him a high-usage player, suggesting the offense stalls when he's on the court, framing a generational offensive force like a flaw that needs fixing. And that's exactly why this matters. Luka Doncic is the blueprint Caitlin Clark openly studies and admires. She said it herself on national television during the NBA on NBC broadcast, without hesitation when asked which current player she'd borrow from Luka Doncic. That puts the Indiana Fever's franchise star on record, celebrating the very style of basketball her head coach clearly rejects. This isn't a small debate over play calls or spacing. It's a direct clash in basketball philosophy. A stark divide between how the game is being taught and how the team's most important player believes it should be played.
Well, that's not what any of us want to see. I mean, can we not sign up for that?
Even more specifically, because there's things in his game maybe you would want to add to yours in the league?
Man, I think Luka. I mean, Luka's amazing and he's incredible. I think the way he can not only score the ball, but also the way he passes. And I think the thing about him is, like, he's not the fastest, he's not the most athletic, but he can get a defender to move where he wants him to go, and he takes up that space, and he does a really good job of either keeping the defender behind him or keeping him to the side. So I think that's something I can certainly learn from. Like, I always kind of want to run away from the defense rather than absorbing the contact and taking up the space that they give me. So
now watch Caitlin explain exactly why Luka's game speaks to her. She breaks it down with intent, absorbing contact, claiming space, dictating where defenders are forced to go. This isn't praise for talent alone. It's a detailed study of skills she wants to master, slowing the game to her pace, manipulating defenders with positioning instead of pure speed, running the offense while still being the primary threat. These aren't throwaway comments. This is a future superstar clearly outlining the player she's building herself into. And here's where it gets truly compelling. Everything Caitlin just praised stands in direct opposition to what Stephanie White values. Back in January 2019, when Dallas played without Luka due to injury, White openly celebrated how the offense looked better, more players involved, the ball moving freely, usage spread out. She genuinely believed the team benefited without its best player because the system appeared cleaner. That contrast says everything.
All right, Black and White Sports supporters, let's talk about Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. My goodness, there was something said last night during Caitlin Clark's special NBA analyst.
Let's lock in the timeline, because the context changes everything. Last night, January 2025, Caitlin Clark took the mic as an analyst on NBC's Knicks-Lakers broadcast from Madison Square Garden, a major national stage, and when asked which current NBA players she studies, she instantly pointed to Luka Doncic, breaking down his command of tempo, his strength and physicality despite not being the fastest or most explosive, and his rare blend of elite vision and scoring touch. There was nothing bold or controversial about it. Luka is a generational force, fresh off dominant playoff performances and still carving up defenses. Exactly the kind of player a high IQ guard like Caitlin should be studying. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. 6 years earlier, in January 2019, Stephanie White was on color commentary for an Indiana Fever broadcast while Dallas played without Luka due to an ankle injury, and she couldn't hide her excitement about how much better the Mavericks looked, more ball movement, more shared responsibility, openly suggesting the team functioned better without its best player. That contrast is impossible to ignore.
You don't say? She feels like a superstarless team. That's her jam. We tried to tell you that is her jam. And here we are, right here. The player that Caitlin Clark would most like to add to her game in the league right now is the one that Stephanie White doesn't have any appreciation for.
Step back and look at what's really unfolding here, because this goes far beyond one player or one coach. What we're seeing is a collision between two radically different visions of elite basketball. Caitlin Clark embodies the modern superstar archetype: high usage, ball in hand, fully capable of bending games through scoring and playmaking. She led the nation in both points and assists at Iowa, transformed the Fever from a lottery team into a playoff threat in a single season, and posted one of the highest usage rates in the league as a rookie while still lifting everyone around her. Stephanie White, on the other hand, comes from a different basketball lineage. One that prioritizes the system over the star, constant ball movement over individual creation, and collective efficiency over singular dominance. And to be fair, that philosophy has real pedigree. The Spurs built a dynasty on it, and the 2014 title team played some of the most beautiful team basketball ever seen. But here's the catch: even though Spurs had Tim Duncan, every great system still needs a cornerstone. The issue is that White appears to genuinely believe teams are better without that dominant force. And her reaction to the Luka-less Mavericks wasn't casual analysis, it was confirmation of a worldview she's always believed in.
I mean, those red flags are so red, they're like maroon. This should send off fireworks about how Stephanie White would like to really use Caitlin Clark. And if you're a fan of Caitlin Clark's game, it ought to be frightening to you. Because we want to see Caitlin Clark cook. Let's just be real. But we also believe the Indiana Fever are a better team when Caitlin Clark is, lack of a better way of putting it, hitting threes, hitting shots, and distributing the ball.
Now let's deal with what this actually means for the Indiana Fever going forward. Christy Sides was dismissed after guiding the team to its first playoff appearance in years. And while the official explanation was wrapped in corporate vagueness about a new direction, the message underneath was obvious: ownership wanted a coach who could fully unlock Caitlin Clark. Someone who knew how to build around a once-in-a-generation talent. Enter Stephanie White, Indiana native, former Fever player, proven college coach at Vanderbilt. Flawless resume on paper. She checked every box. And of course, she said the right things about Caitlin during the interview process. No one lands the most coveted job in women's basketball by admitting they'd rather tone down the franchise centerpiece. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if White told ownership exactly what they wanted to hear to get the job, while her true basketball philosophy runs counter to maximizing Clark's impact? We've seen this play out before, especially in pro sports. Coaches praise the star player on the way in, get hired, then quietly install a system that favors their beliefs over the talent already in place. If that's what's happening here, the Fever aren't facing a personality clash, they're staring at a fundamental mismatch between their future and the person chosen to lead it.
But if you gave the Indiana Fever head coach truth serum, would she truly feel that the same? There's been small things said by Stephanie White over time that would lead you to believe, this marriage could end up becoming broken. Could end up becoming a more of a divorce at some point. And it kind of makes you wonder. It almost feels like in the NFL, they just went through the coaches hiring cycle. All right. 10 coaches got fired. And yesterday, 2 more coaches got hired. That completed the cycle. And I always get the sense sometimes that some of these coaches...
Here's what should genuinely alarm Fever fans. The warning signs are already there. Subtle comments from Stephanie White about prioritizing ball movement, stressing total involvement, even floating the idea of trimming Caitlin Clark's minutes to keep her fresh. None of it sounds troubling on its own. But once you understand White's core philosophy, once you remember she openly praised teams for looking better without their superstar, those remarks hit differently. Last season, the entire WNBA grappled with the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, resentment from veterans, Media push back against her popularity, passive-aggressive talk about rookies earning respect, and a quiet but persistent belief in some corners that the league would be healthier if no one star dominated the spotlight. More balance, less focus on one player, more system and superstar. Stephanie White has lived inside that culture for decades as a player, coach, and broadcaster. And everything we know about her basketball beliefs suggests she's aligned with that worldview, not out of personal animosity toward Caitlin, but because she genuinely believes elite basketball works best when the star is blended into the system rather than allowed to define it.
A lot of bullshit up the asses, up the skirts of NFL owners, particularly about whoever is their quarterback. Right? And that's really what Caitlin Clark is. She's the superstar quarterback. And they blow up, and you, oh yeah, I like it. We can do something with him. We can, and what the coach is really thinking, I'm gonna get through this year, and when this guy shits the bed, as far as I'm concerned, I'm gonna go draft another quarterback, or I'm gonna sign a guy in free agency. They're never really truly on board, but they told ownership what they wanted to hear in order to get the job. And are we looking at a situation to bring this back around where Stephanie White told Indiana Fever leadership, the higher-ups, the owner, what they wanted to hear to be able to take this job? Because it's a high-profile job, right? Yeah, it's a high...
Let's get precise about what Caitlin actually said she wants from Luka's game-claiming space. Keeping defenders on her hip or behind her. Welcoming contact instead of avoiding it, and every one of those skills demands high usage. You don't learn that craft by giving the ball up early, and you don't master pace control if you're constantly told to keep things moving for the sake of flow. Luka Doncic dominates the ball as much as almost anyone in the NBA, with a usage rate near 37%, meaning over a third of Dallas possessions end with him deciding the outcome. And that approach just carried the Mavericks to the NBA Finals by dismantling elite defenses like Minnesota and Oklahoma City through deliberate, half-court control. That's the exact toolkit Caitlin is trying to add to her game. And it directly contradicts what Stephanie White once celebrated an offense without Luka, where the ball zipped around, usage dropped, and the system looked cleaner. White framed that version of Dallas as a solution, not a compromise. And that's where the contradiction becomes impossible to ignore. How do you coach a player who wants to become more like Luka Doncic when you fundamentally believe teams function better without players like Luka Doncic?
The most dynamic, likable player in all the league. Yeah, it's a dynamic job. It's the most coveted job in the WNBA. Let's be real. It's the most coveted job from a coaching standpoint in women's sports. Yeah, facts. But does any of that matter? I mean, we know that the entire WNBA is filled with females that are ate up with the fact that Caitlin Clark is not really her. So you want to just...
And here's the larger context that makes all of this impossible to dismiss. The WNBA just delivered its most successful season ever, and the driving force was Caitlin Clark. Ratings surged. Attendance records fell, merchandise exploded, and the Fever went from half-filled arenas to sellouts, and playoff games moved into bigger buildings. That wave didn't happen by accident. It happened because Caitlin plays the very style Stephanie White appears to resist high usage. Ball in hand, fully capable of taking over games. Fans aren't packing arenas to admire flawless ball circulation. They're coming to watch Caitlin drop 30 and 10. Pull it from the logo and carve defenses apart with passes no one else sees. They want a superstar experience. But what if the coach doesn't? What if White truly believes the Fever would be better with a more evenly distributed offense, that Caitlin's usage needs to be scaled back to reach some theoretical ceiling? That's not speculation. We've heard her express that exact belief when evaluating other teams. And that's what makes this situation so fragile, because the league, the franchise, and the fan base are all aligned around one vision. while the person in charge of implementing it may be pulling in a completely different direction. Caitlin Clark has just told the basketball world exactly who she's trying to become. More physical, more deliberate, more ball dominant. A player who controls games through pace, positioning, and decision-making the way Luka does, and those are the skills she's actively building toward. At the same time, her head coach has already gone on record celebrating the opposite approach, openly admiring a version of the Mavericks without Luka Doncic as her ideal brand of basketball. Faster tempo, constant ball movement, evenly distributed usage. That wasn't polite analysis or forced optimism. It was genuine enthusiasm. And that's the problem. You cannot grow into a Luka-style player under a coach who believes teams are better without Luka-style players. That's not a small disagreement, it's a direct philosophical conflict, and something eventually has to give. What makes this even more concerning is what's at stake. Caitlin Clark is the most valuable asset in women's basketball. A player whose presence lifted the entire league, pulled in millions of new viewers, shattered merchandise records, and likely doubled the Fever's franchise value in a single season. But history shows us one uncomfortable truth. Basketball coaches believe deeply in their systems, and when ego meets ideology, talent doesn't always win automatically. Coaches carry philosophies they've honed over decades, and sometimes those beliefs matter more to them than unlocking a player's full potential. We've seen it time and again in professional sports, brilliant athletes forced into systems that stifle their strengths. Generational talents diminished because the collective was prioritized over the individual. Stephanie White comes from that very mindset. Her praise for the Luka-less Mavericks wasn't casual commentary. It was a clear window into how she genuinely thinks basketball should be played. And now she's charged with coaching a player who aspires to emulate the very style she once suggested weakens teams. The warning signs aren't just red, they're maroon, burgundy, every hue of caution imaginable, because we're watching two visions of elite basketball collide. Only one of them controls how the Indiana Fever actually play. Caitlin Clark can study Luka Doncic endlessly, refine her ability to claim space, absorb contact, and control pace, but if her coach doesn't grant the freedom to execute those skills, if White's system demands lower usage and constant ball movement, then all of that development and potential could be squandered. Caitlin Clark will be trying to become a Ferrari while her coach insists on driving a minivan. And before anyone dismisses this as overblown or assumes White will simply adjust to maximize Caitlin, ask yourself, why would she? Stephanie White has spent 30 years in basketball as a player, coach and broadcaster, forming deeply held convictions about how the game should be played. Do you really think she's going to abandon all that because a rookie, no matter how prodigious, wants to do things differently? The NFL provides a perfect parallel. Coaches who interview, praise the existing quarterback to land the job, and then quietly push their own system, forcing even elite QBs into schemes that don't fit. It happens over and over because coaches are married to their philosophies. White is no different. She believes in system basketball, in constant ball movement, in distributed usage. She said it publicly. And now she's tasked with coaching the one player who embodies everything she said she doesn't value. The collision isn't theoretical, it's inevitable. This isn't going to end quietly. Maybe not this season, maybe White holds back. Lets Caitlin dominate while the spotlight's on. But eventually, that philosophical divide will surface. Eventually, White will push her system. And when the coach who praised the Luka-less Mavericks tries to turn Caitlin Clark into a balanced player, the clash will be unavoidable. The signs are clear. Caitlin has told us who she wants to become, and Stephanie has told us what she believes makes teams succeed. Those visions don't align. Everyone involved better hope White values winning more than clinging to her ideology. Because if she attempts to curb Caitlin the way she once celebrated curbing Luka, the Fever risks squandering the most marketable, transformative talent women's basketball has ever produced. Pay close attention this season. Track Caitlin's usage rate. Watch how often the ball stays in her hands during crunch time. See if White allows her to control pace, absorb contact, and take up space the way she wants to emulate Luka, or if the offense shifts toward the more balanced, egalitarian style White once praised 6 years ago. That's the clearest indicator of whether this partnership can actually work. And judging from everything we've seen and heard from both sides, optimism is hard to find. So here's the question. What happens when Caitlin wants to play like Luka, and her coach believes teams are stronger without Luka-style players? Drop your prediction in the comments, because this philosophical divide is only going to grow.